Hello and welcome to the first QA recorded study guide. The study guide that you have in front of you has the terms that we are going to talk about and that are important. The things here on the screen may be a little different. For example, First Americans is not on your study guide, but it is important for me to talk about it just to set up some of the other terms. Now, should you know a little bit about the First Americans and stuff like that? Yes. Did I think it was important to put on the study guide? No. So you need to figure out what you really need to write about the First Americans. But I would be focusing on the terms that are on your study guide. Just to recap, the First Americans, if you're looking at this map, they are going to be people that are crossing the land bridge from Siberia over to North America, and then spreading out over the years, going their separate ways, and forming their own societies. Because they are going to be forming their own societies, they are going to start having different ways of living. And a big way that they are different is broken up into these three categories right here: sedentary, semi-sedentary, and non-sedentary. And all of these can be found on page 6. They are bulleted points in your book explaining what each of them are. So you need to know the difference between each of these three things. You need to know that sedentary is they stay in one place. It's permanent. They don't move. Large cities, wide streets, marketplaces. Semi-sedentary are groups of people that are going to stay in one place for a few years, but then move. So they're semi-sedentary, staying in one place for like 4 to 5 years, and then they'll pick up and move. That's not permanent villages, they're not permanent towns, but they do stay in one place for a little while. But then the non-sedentary are always moving, looking for food. So you kind of have, starting at the top, you have sedentary that stay in one place, and then non-sedentary is the opposite of that because it's non-sedentary, and that means they're always moving. A way to remember this that I talk about is if you live a sedentary lifestyle, that is the opposite of an active lifestyle. And that means a sedentary lifestyle is one where you don't exercise, you just stay on the couch. And if you stay on the couch, what happens to you? You get large. Just like these cities did. If you are constantly moving all over the place, you constantly are needing to, get energy somehow or get food somehow because you're using all of your energy, you're exercising and you're burning all of those calories that you're taking in. So non-sedentary people are always moving and looking for food and always trying to find stuff. And they are the opposite of these sedentary large cities, wide streets, marketplaces, getting very large, getting very big, sedentary lifestyle, couch potato. That's kind of how I would try to remember it. So now if we move away from the first people in America and the stuff like that, we move on to the Renaissance and Reformation. The reason that we talk about the Renaissance and Reformation is because in Europe at this time, things are going bad because we have things like the Black Death, the Great Famine, 100 Years' War, kills a whole bunch of people. If you remember, the Black Death was spread in this kind of manner. The fleas get infected by the rats, and then the flea bites this sad little dude, and he lays down and dies, and all that kind of stuff. So things are getting bad in Europe, but they start turning around because of these things right here, the Renaissance and the Reformation. The Renaissance is on page 18 and 19. You need to understand that both of these movements, which is what we call them, movements, have a great effect on the way people live in Europe, because before this, we've got Black Death, Great Famine, 100 Years' War. Nobody's really focused on learning much. They're all focused on surviving. But that changes with the Renaissance. Before the Renaissance, people were more worried about getting bit by those fleas and dying, and not really thinking about taking care of themselves and learning and, learning more about the world. They were just focused on not dying. I give the example is, if you were in school and you have a test on Friday, and on Monday you realize that 20 people around you are not here at school because they've died from some mysterious disease, and then on Tuesday 20 more people, and Wednesday 20 more, and it's just spreading from all around, you aren't really going to be focusing on studying for that test on Friday. You're going to be focusing on, how am I going to survive and not get this awful disease? But once that kind of situation stops in Europe, we see the Renaissance, which leads to more education, education, art, math, things like this that are all important, and people start learning. People start wanting to better themselves, focus on education, and all this kind of stuff. The second movement that we look at is the Reformation, and the Reformation is basically, it has to do with the church. We have two groups. We have the Catholics and the Protestants. And basically, it is about reforming the church. So if we look at the word Reformation, you can see right here that reform is in the word. It splits off into two groups. You have the Catholics, who follow the Pope, and the Protestants, who want to break away. The new religion that comes into play here are the Protestants. The Protestants are a completely new religion that come of the Reformation, so that's important to know. So this invention called the printing press helps grow these two movements, helps spread the word of these two movements. This is a picture of the printing press. The printing press can be found on page 19, and what we're talking about here is it makes books can be printed faster. Because these books can be printed faster, more people are buying them and more people are reading, and that means that the ideas of the Reformation and the Renaissance up here are spreading. And also what is spreading is just like a curiosity about the world. So more books, more reading, more knowledge, the printing press leads to interest in world exploration. So the printing press leads us to this interest in world exploration, more people going out and getting curious about the world, and once they are getting more curious about the world, they start going over there. And one of the first countries that is going to be exploring in the New World would be the Spanish, and once the Spanish realize that they want to set up colonies in the New World, they are going to start taking over the land. And the only problem with the Spanish just saying, oh, this is our land and we would like to have this, is that there are a whole bunch of people already living there. So we start with the Aztecs, and this story can be found on page 31 and 32. We look at the Aztecs, and first we have to remember that the person that is leading the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs is Hernando Cortez. So you have to associate Hernando Cortez with the Aztecs. You cannot forget that those two things go together. So Hernando Cortez, because the Aztecs are in Mexico, Hernando Cortez leads his 508 conquistadors into Mexico, and where he's facing, all of these Aztecs, and, he marches into Tenochtitlan, which is the capital the city of the Aztecs, and you have the La Noche Trista, or the Sad Night, where a whole bunch of people die, but he comes back and he finally conquers the Aztecs, and we're going to get to some of the reasons why they conquer the Aztecs, or some of the reasons the Spanish are so successful here in just a little bit, but we'll talk about that after we look at the fall of the Incas, which kind of follows the same path as the Aztecs. You need to remember Incas, Peru. They're in Peru, which is on this map right here. It would be in this area right here. So you have the Aztecs in Peru, and what you need to kind of focus on for this is to remember that, Francisco Pizarro conquers the Incas. So you have the Incas and Pizarro, Cortez, and the Aztecs. Remember, Peru starts with a P. Inca has 4 letters. Peru has 4 letters. Peru starts with a P. Pizarro starts with a P. So kind of make all of these connections to help you remember. Both of these things can be found on page 32. What you kind of need to get out of the fall of the Aztecs and the fall of the Incas is, what allows the Spanish, Francisco Pizarro has 180 people that he comes in with. And then Cortez only has 508. So we're talking about a very small amount of people. The Incas influence 10 million people. So they are very outnumbered. So what allows the Spanish to conquer these vast empires so easily? One thing you have to remember is that the Spanish make allies with the enemies of the Incas and the Aztecs. Can't forget that the European diseases that are spread have a huge impact on the Native American population. And then the last thing that you need to remember is that the Spanish were rather brutal to these people. So Francisco Pizarro, Hernando Cortez, the Spanish come in, they conquer them, the allies, the diseases, all of these things. All right, let's move right along to the other European nations, other than Spain, and talking about the Northwest Passage. When we look at the Northwest Passage, what you kind of need to, first of all, we're looking at Chapter 2, Section 2, page 35. What you need to kind of remember is that these people have no idea kind of what land they're looking at or where they're going or anything like that. So they're leaving from Europe and they think maybe they can go over this area of land and sail off. And what they want to do is they want to get to Asia. So the Northwest Passage, they are all trying to get to Asia. And the problem, as we've talked about with trying to go over that little land area, is that, you have Canada in the way. So Canada kind of ruins that plan. Always ruining everything, Canada. So the Northwest Passage, they're trying to get to Asia, quicker trade route. It doesn't exist, so that's important to remember. But another thing to kind of just focus on a little bit is some of the main names that are going to be looking for the Northwest Passage. John Cabot, Henry Hudson, Jock Carter. All of these people are going to be found around page 35, 37, things like 38. Nothing, you don't really need to know huge specifics about them. Need to focus on the fact that they are looking for, and they will never find, this all-water route to Asia over the North American continent known as the Northwest Passage. So Henry Hudson, Jock Carter. All right, let's get down here to defeat of the Spanish Armada. Now, if we remember back to the line of demarcation in the Treaty of Tordesillas, we have a huge map of the world, let's say, and you have the Pope who draws a line down the middle of it, and then they move the line a little bit. So what you have is the Treaty of Tordesillas, which says that everything on this side is going to be Spanish, and everything on this side is going to be Portugal. So what this does is this says that all of this land over here is Spanish, and if all of this stuff over here has Spain's name all over it. Now, if the English are coming over here, leaving from England, and leaving from England and coming over and exploring all of this area and trying to get the Northwest Passage and all that kind of stuff, they are kind of stepping on Spain's territory. But the thing is, England doesn't care that the Pope drew a line there and said that it's theirs, because England is Protestant and Queen Elizabeth up here is Protestant, so she wants to take over this land and she doesn't really care what the Spanish have to say about it. So the Spanish kind of get angry, and what makes them even angrier is what Queen Elizabeth does. What she does is send Sir Francis Drake on this journey around the world, leaving from England, going around the tip of South America, and then stealing all of this stuff from the Spanish, just raiding all of these ports along the way. And this makes Spain really angry. So what do? They send some of their ships, called the Spanish Armada, into the English Channel to take over England and, make them under Spain's control. So we're looking at this on page 37, and that's kind of the story of why it happens. And then you have to realize that what happens is England wins, and because England wins, it proves that England can defend itself, and it's going to remain Protestant, and that Spain can be defeated. And the important part about Spain being defeated is that Spain no longer dominates the Atlantic Ocean or the North American continent or the North American continent. So other countries, especially England, now feel comfortable going over there and exploring and setting up their colonies and all of this kind of stuff. So when we look at Spanish missions, which is the next thing on your study guide, we're looking at page 43. This is a little picture of what a Spanish mission might have looked like. So the main goal of a mission is basically a settlement with a church. And the main goal is that they want to convert Native Americans to Christianity. So that's what you really need to know. They want to convert Native Americans to Christianity. That's the main goal. All right, moving on to Columbian Exchange. That is on the next page, page 44. This is a picture that I'm sure you are all familiar with by now of the Columbian Exchange. We have things leaving from Europe or the Eastern Hemisphere, coming to the Western Hemisphere, and coming from the Western Hemisphere to the Eastern Hemisphere. So we're talking about the transfer or movement of plants, animals, and diseases in between the Eastern and Western Hemisphere. Now, some things were good, like pumpkins and turkeys and all this kind of stuff. Like, before the Columbian Exchange, there were no pumpkins in Europe. Before the Columbian Exchange, there were no turkeys in Europe. And there were no cows in North America. But because of this, people are bringing things, taking things back, all of this kind of stuff. And it's this movement of plants, animals. And not all of them are positive, because we have that last thing, diseases, which is what we talked a little bit about with the fall of the Aztecs and the Incas, is, these European diseases that these Native Americans have no immunity to. They catch the disease, they die very quickly, and a lot of them died. 90 to 95% in Central America, 20 million. That's a lot of people. So another negative effect is something that we look at when we talk about African slaves. And that is going to be starting on page 50, and that's chapter 2, section 4. Kind of what you need to remember about, or what you need to kind of focus on is, why did the Spanish start using African slaves instead of Native American slaves? Remember that the Native American slaves, we just talked about the Native Americans dying very quickly because of the diseases. And what happens is they realize that Native Americans also have allies very close by, and they can just run away, and they know the territory, or they can be saved. The African slaves, we're talking about, not really having allies in the Americas because they are from Africa and they don't have friends and family around. And they're immune to the diseases. They kind of know how to work on some of these plantations, and they are what the Spanish need instead of using Native Americans. All right, so that is the end of kind of reviewing for Unit 1. Let's move on to Unit 2 a little quicker. Yes, moving on. Now, when we look at stuff for Unit 2, this should not be that difficult to recall most of this stuff because we just were talking about all of this. One thing that's not on your study guide, we're looking at Sir Walter Raleigh, first guy to set up England's first colonies, Virginia, Roanoke. Now these fail. He is not successful, and he loses all of his money. And people start thinking, hey, I don't want to go over there and lose all my money, but I do want to, set up a colony because there are some benefits. I could make some money. Now, I could lose all of my money, but I want to give it a try at least. So they start setting up joint stock companies, which is the next thing on your study guide, page 62. Joint stock company, you're looking at a group of investors. People, if it cost $10,000 to start a colony, before this, that is all Sir Walter Raleigh. He is paying all 10,000 of those dollars. In a joint stock company, you might have 10 people who each pay $1,000, so on and so on. So instead of, if the colony fails, he's out $10,000, which is a lot of money. Each of these people is out $1,000, which is still a lot of money, but it's not nearly $10,000. And so you carry a lot less of the risk in setting up a colony with a joint stock company. The first successful English colony is Jamestown. Here's a picture of Jamestown. This Jamestown is found on page 63 through 64. And the thing that you need to remember about Jamestown is obviously it's the first successful or permanent English settlement, but also that this crop right here, tobacco, saved Jamestown because they start growing it and they start making money. And because they start making money, more people want to come over to Jamestown, which makes it larger, makes it prosper. Because they are growing a lot of tobacco, they are then selling it, and that is making England money. And that brings us to the next term on your study guide, which is mercantilism. Mercantilism can be found on page 62, so you got to go back just a little bit. But the idea here is that the colony produces some sort of raw material. In the Jamestown case, it is tobacco. In this picture's case, it is a beaver, but it's the fur of the beaver. This beaver is trapped and killed. Once again, sorry to be so graphic. If you wanted to see this beaver live, sorry, it's going to be turned into a hat. So the fur from this beaver that is trapped and killed in the colony is sent over to England. It is made into a hat, and then it is sold. And because the home country, or England, has a lot of colonies, they can produce a lot of furs and they can produce a lot of hats, which means they're selling a lot of stuff. This is what mercantilism is. It is selling more than you buy. Selling more goods than you buy. And that is going to make them money. And without colonies, this system doesn't work very well, especially if you're a smaller country like England, because you can't produce as many goods if you don't have as much land. All right. Now, what ends up happening is that the colonists are, doing all of these things for the country, and they're making a lot of money, but they aren't really having any say about anything in the colony. So what they want to do is have a voice in their government and a voice in how much taxes should be or anything like that. So on page 64 to 65, they talk about the House of Burgesses. People in Jamestown maybe one year are going to pay 10% in taxes, and then the next year, without them having any say, it goes up to 20% and then 30% or whatever. And it's going up without them having a say in how much taxes should be. The problem with that is they it's not that they don't want to pay taxes, is that they want to have a say in how much taxes should be. It would be like you waking up in the morning, unplugging your phone from the cell phone charger, and somebody saying, okay, that's $5. If you want to use your phone, that's $5. And you didn't have any vote in this. That's just how things are now. And then maybe a month later it's $10. And it just keeps on getting more and more, and nobody is asking you or letting you vote. What the House of Burgesses does is it sets up the first representative form of government in the colonies. So it's the first representative form of government in the colonies. And we talked about representative government by saying, if the school has a school-wide vote, if it was a representative government or a representative school government, each class would pick one person from that class to go up to the office and vote in the way that the majority of people in our class want to vote. So they would go up to the office and represent us in the office by voting yes or no, or however the majority of the people in class wanted to vote. So the House of Burgesses, first form of representative government in the colonies. What happens to Jamestown is that it gets taken over by the king because he says that he's worried about some Indian or Native American rebellions and stuff like that. But basically what happens is it becomes a royal colony. And the definition for royal colony can be found on page 65, but it's pretty simple to remember what a royal colony is. It's a colony that is run by the king. So, it's royal. The king's a member of the royal family. All right, let's move on to Chapter 3, Section 2, we're looking at the dissenters. A dissenter is somebody that disagrees, disagrees with the establishment. In this case, we're talking about the church. When we look at the pilgrims, we're looking at page 68. Remember, the pilgrims, before they were the pilgrims, were the separatists. They come over to America because they are being persecuted. They don't like the Church of England. They want to separate from it because they are separatists. So they separate and leave, and they become pilgrims when they come to America. They ride over on the Mayflower, and because they land outside of the rule of the English, they set up their own document with their own rules called the Mayflower Compact, which is on page 68. And the Mayflower Compact is the Pilgrims' document that they write that sets up their government, their rules, their laws. Another group of dissenters are the Puritans, and the Puritans can be found on page 68 as well. And what you really need to look at with the Puritans is that, they want to purify, they want to reform the church, they want to, make it better. They don't necessarily want to break away like the separatists or the pilgrims do, but what ends up happening is they get persecuted just like the separatists, so they have to end up moving and leaving anyway. So they come over to the Americas as well. They, set up in New England, and that's kind of what you need to know about them. So let's move on to the next section, which starts on your study guide with proprietary colony, which is on page 78. I put Lord Baltimore up here because Lord Baltimore is in charge of Maryland. Maryland was a royal colony, so it was controlled by the king, but now the king gives it to Lord Baltimore, a single person, and it becomes a proprietary colony. So, because it is a proprietary colony, it is governed by a single owner. So, a single owner runs a proprietary colony, unlike a royal colony where the king runs it. So, an example of a proprietary colony is Maryland, run by Lord Baltimore. When we look at the Tidewater is going to be on page 81. It's down here. I put the Carolinas and Georgia here because both of these areas are going to benefit from the Tidewater because you can grow things like rice or tobacco. both of these things require a lot of labor, so they are going to require a lot of slaves. Rice requires a lot of labor, tobacco requires a lot of labor, so you're going to have a lot of slaves because, these people at this time are not going to pay people if they can just get slaves. When we look at New Amsterdam, this is something that you guys need to focus on a little bit because this is on page 83, because this was something that people got a little mixed up on the test. New Netherlands is the colony that the Dutch have. New Amsterdam is a city within New Netherlands. It's like the most important city in New Netherlands. The Duke of York comes in, he's from England, he comes in and takes over New Amsterdam, which makes it to where he also controls New Netherland. But New Netherland is the colony. New Amsterdam he takes over and it becomes New York, like New York City. So New Amsterdam, the city, becomes New York City. And then the English now control the whole colony of New Netherland. So that's important to remember. This is the Duke of York down here. He's the one taking over. The last thing on your study guide is not on here on the screen, but I think you kind of need to focus on, why at first with the Puritans and the Separatists, why are they coming over to set up the colonies? Why do they want to have these colonies? Why are they coming over? You need to focus on that. I would focus on why the Separatists and why the Puritans are coming over. Are the Separatists and Puritans looking for gold and riches, or are they looking for another thing? Are they leaving England because they're being persecuted? So if they're being persecuted in England, what are they looking for in America? Okay, so that is kind of the first QA in a nutshell, and hopefully this will help you study a little bit. Keep looking over your study guide, find those page numbers, read in the book a little bit. I'm sure you'll do fine. Keep studying and good luck.